Harris from Santa Clara High School, talking about how she's using Jo Harris with her senior students in a California program called Expository Reading and Writing. Following that, Carrie Holmberg, who works both with the teaching of methods at San Jose State and with first semester student teachers, will be talking about how she is repurposing rewriting with helping student teachers reflect on their teaching. A program that we like to call Rewriting Our Teaching Practices. Rewriting Our Teaching Practices. Then I'll be the third speaker. My name is Jonathan Lovell. I'm the director of the San Jose Area Writing Project, and I work with Phase 2, or second semester student teachers. And I'll be showing, talking a little bit about how I use Jo Harris's rewriting moves with my second semester student teachers, but more importantly, I'll be showing you some videotapes that will show you how they actually respond. So rather than me doing a lot of talking, my student teachers will be doing most of the talking for my presentation. And then Jo Harris will be wrapping it up by commenting on our three presentations, as well as introducing some points of view that are, as always, unique to Jo. And that will wrap it up hopefully at 12 o'clock, and we hope to have 15 minutes where people will be able to ask questions or offer responses, any of the above. Anyway, let's get started.
Well, I'm so glad to see a full room here. We kind of had a joke. We have 5 people, 6 people. So it's such a delight to be here today with all of you and have you come and hear what we have to say about this great book. My name is Kate Flowers, and I teach at Santa Clara High School, English 10, and I teach a senior course called Expository Reading and Writing. So I first was introduced to this book at the California Association of Teachers of English Conference in 2010 in Ontario, California. And it was my first time attending a National Writing Project event. And to say that it changed the course of my life would really not be an understatement at all. It eventually led me to the San Jose Area Writing Project and now here. So Harris's book, it was very clear that many people in the room of the National Writing Project event, because Dr. Harris did the pre-convention for us, they were already familiar with this book, and many teachers in California at the time had already started using some of his ideas in the senior course that I teach, Expository Reading and Writing. This course that is taught in senior classes was actually designed by Cal State University and high school English teachers to prepare our seniors who are kind of on the cusp. They really need a little bit of extra help to get ready for that college level writing. And the purpose of the course was to decrease the number of students who have to take remedial English when they get to high school, because at the time Cal State was finding about 48% of their students had to take remedial English. We really want to decrease that because we know that makes it harder for kids to graduate from college. So we want to do that. And so this course was designed to help students learn those skills that they need for college level reading and writing. And this year I teach 3 sections of the course. Last year I taught 1 section of it. I also teach 10th grade English. So we're in the heart of Silicon Valley, but we don't have computers in the classroom. All those funny little ironies of teaching everywhere. So let's do a quick survey of the room because we're really interested to see who is with us today. So where are our brave middle school teachers? You guys are awesome. My husband is one of you guys. Thank you very much. We're glad to have you here. And how about my peeps, the high school English teachers? Whoa, awesome. So glad to see you here. Okay, any college writing instructors in the room? Quite a few. Wonderful. And how about English education faculty? Wonderful. We've got a bunch of all of you. We're so glad to have you here today. So what Dr. Harris's book, or Joe Harris's book, I was to try to say Joe and Jonathan, and it's very hard for me because I grew up taught to say all the titles. All right, so I've been teaching for 18 years, and teaching writing is still such a huge challenge every year. And one of the things that instantly drew me to Joe Harris's book was that it created this meta-language to use with students to help them have more of a conceptual approach. I mean, I use they say, I say, and a lot of other great techniques like this, but what instead of just plugging things into a sentence frame, what this does is allow students to get some of the concepts, the big concepts of academic discourse. And his book relates the moves of a writer to an academic writer, to the moves of academic discourse, using some familiar language to students, language from email for one of them. So the 4 moves of rewriting are coming to terms, forwarding, countering, and taking an approach. Now, I'll be really honest, I haven't messed much with taking an approach with my students yet, because I've found that the first 3 moves really keep my hands full. It's a lot to give students good practice in. So the first term of his meta-language is coming to terms. And what this first step is letting our students know that they just can't instantly look at something and understand it, that texts don't reveal their meaning to us. We have to actually engage in the text and make meaning of this. And the goal is to be generous, and this is one thing that I really, really like about Harris and how he presents this to students. This book was actually written to the audience of college freshman composition students, but using it at the senior level has worked, and I've even used it with honors sophomores, and that went really successfully as well. But one of the things I really enjoyed about this book and thought was important was that he talks about when we are using sources and how to use sources in our source-based writing. He teaches students to be really generous and fair with how they use outside sources. And in this polarized media world that our students are so familiar with, they're just used to people taking 2 sides and yelling about it on TV. And that's not really how academic discourse works. And so teaching students to be generous and fair with how they use outside sources by asking the question, what is the writer trying to do in this text? So really looking at what was the purpose of this author. And he also encourages students to look at taking the source and translating it into their own words and really making meaning of the text. So maybe I'm not a college teacher, so I don't know. Maybe college freshmen have no problem with this, but high school seniors do. I hear some giggles, so I see that it's still a struggle. So high school seniors definitely do have trouble coming to terms. When I was doing this without a structured approach, my kids were like, they'd read something, got it. Really? You got it like that? I don't think so. So one of the tools that the expository reading and writing course training gave me that I really valued was the structured 4-sentence rhetorical précis. And so I've been using that with my seniors for a couple of years, and I really have found that this structured approach has helped my students really have to spend time on a source that they're going to use in their writing. So it's 4 sentences, and since it's a rhetorical précis, it's not just what is said, but how they develop their claim. So it forces them to trace the development of how the author has made their point, and then looking at the author's purpose and their tone and who their intended audience was. So my students wrote one on an article that we were reading and studying for one of our modules on racial profiling, and it was on Bob Herbert's wonderful op-ed called Jim Crow Policing. And so this is one that the student read, and this is actually the first one we did this year in class. And this next one is from a really funny column by the young adult novelist Rainbow Rowell, who wrote Eleanor and Park, one of the best books of this decade, I'm sure. And her column was called "Learn to Read, Kid, but Don't Fall in Love," about reading addiction and how dangerous it really is in kind of a tongue-in-cheek way. So now one of the requirements for me is that students have to do a rhetorical précis on sources that they're using so that they actually have engaged and come to terms with what the author is actually saying. So the second move of Harris's book rewriting is forwarding. And so he borrows the term from email. We would forward an email that we found interesting, that we want other people to read and understand. So I seem to get all these forwarded emails from my uncle, because he knows I love Obama, so everything anti-Obama I get, because he just thinks I would find it interesting, a little dig, right? So forwarding gives us two kind of ways to look at it. And the first is giving us something to think about. And this seems to be the comfort zone for most of my students, that they're using anecdotes and images, scenarios, data, and facts. And so he calls this illustrating, when they look to other texts for examples, for a point they want to make. Well, this makes perfect sense to students because this is usually the only thing that they do with outside sources. They have something to think about. But what he shows us with forwarding is that there's a lot more that we can do. It can also give us things to think with. So keywords, concepts, theories. So authorizing, when we use the expertise, and some students do this, and I'll show you an example in a little bit. Borrowing, when we use the terms from other writers in our thinking, and then extending, when we put our own spin on those concepts. Now, I have to say, I don't always see this in high school seniors, but I do see some of them. For example, this is from the latest argumentative essay that one of my students wrote in my expository reading and writing course, a senior, and he was writing about drones. And so he invokes and authorizes his position by using something that an officer from the Air Force had stated, so using that expertise, and then he builds upon that in his commentary, which you can see in red here. So he's using some authorizing to forward his point. The next move is countering, the third move. And as he explains the term, one of the things, again, I like is the nuanced approach where he says that countering is not to nullify, but to suggest a different way of thinking. And students, again, we have that very black and white thinking. And so getting that idea that we're not just there to annihilate the person that we're countering, but that we're suggesting, hey, there's this different way of looking at things. So in countering, he gives us three ways of countering. And the first is arguing the other side. So showing the usefulness of a term that has been criticized, noting the problems. Uncovering values, and this is a really exciting one to me when students can do this. And so I'll show you an example from a really excellent writer that I have this year, where she uncovered the value of a source that she was using and analyzing that in terms of what it actually says about the values that influence that text. And then dissenting, where they identify a shared line of thought on an issue. So here's an example from just a brilliant girl in my class, a senior, Amber. And so she was writing about the media and its depiction of black victims. And so I'm just going to actually read this one. So she says here, on the day of his funeral, the New York Times ran an article stating that the slain Mike Brown was no angel. As more than 4,500 packed into a Missouri church to say their final goodbyes to the boy they described as a gentle soul, the New York Times thought it was necessary and appropriate to remind everyone that Mike Brown was no angel. This is no isolated incident. Media for years has been jumping through hoops to sully the names and reputations of black victims. So she's using her source to really uncover the values that the New York Times was appealing to in their editorial. So an interesting and exciting moment for me when I read this. I'm like, yes, this is great. So the fourth move is taking an approach. And so I eventually planned to get around with this, but to be honest, really working on how to use outside text in our source-based writing has been a challenge, and the first 3 moves have kept me very busy. But taking an approach is working in the mode of another writer. So acknowledging the influences of other writers, turning an approach upon itself, and reflexivity. So Dr. Lovell will be talking much more about this later on here. But as well as being a person who's trying to teach these moves, I'm also a teacher who's using these moves to help me reflect in a meaningful way. So last year and this year, I've been periodically using the 4 moves to look at days of teaching and lessons. And so this was one that I wrote on the 27th of October after a particularly terrifying and bad lesson. So I taught a lesson on Dave Barry's really funny story or column, The Ugly Truth About Beauty. And it went great first period, terrible second period. So I had to try to figure out what had gone wrong with this. And so I talked about we afforded what worked, and so some things really did work. And then countering, and I realized I really oversold how funny this was to him, to my students. And if you challenge a teenager and you tell them they're going to really love it, then they're going to take the other side, right? Like a 3-year-old. And so I really asked for it. But what I did learn, and this made me feel so much better when I did this reflection by taking an approach, what was my larger purpose in teaching this lesson, is that while they may not have laughed and made me feel great about the lesson, they did learn. They did reach the goals of this lesson. And so using this structure has been very, very helpful to me. So I'm going to go ahead and pass this on now to Carrie Holmberg, who's going to talk about how she has used this strategy with her beginning teachers.
Good morning. It's my pleasure to be here. It's great to see you all. Do we have any student teachers, so beginning teachers in the room, or beginning people in their first year of teaching? Fantastic, we have one. It's so great to have you here. How many of you are currently working with a beginning teacher, whether on a daily basis or say you're in a mentoring role and you have a whole bevy of beginning teachers? All right, that's okay. And university supervisors, so you have the evaluation component more so. Not that the other, okay, thank you. All right. I just want to honor that so much of teaching expertise that is here in the room, and that much of it is invisible still. And so it's so interesting that we're in a profession where so much of what we do depends upon stuff that's in our mind that doesn't make it to paper or an app or somehow get recorded. Anyway, so I'm here to talk about what happens when we forward Harris's meta-language into the teacher preparation context. So I have the great fortune of being at San Jose State University. It's one of the most largest diverse campuses, public universities in California, certainly among the CSUs. And I get to work with Jonathan. So I've taught methods now for several semesters, preparing people who want to be middle school and high school English teachers, and supervising the beginning candidates. When I say beginning, the culmination of their student teaching experience is 15 consecutive days of lead teaching. Not very much. And I would say a third of those have not taught before in almost any capacity. And we have candidates of every age. So not just students in their 20s. And our students work outside to get through school. So I have an affinity for Joe Harris's approach to teaching of writing because the meta-language offers a set of terms for beginning writers or to think and reflect about their writing. And so my approach to student teaching and advising or supervising candidates is similar in that regard, is that I don't do a lot of direct instruction. Yes, I will go to that instructive mode and sometimes a collaborative mode, but I like to spend as much time as possible in the facilitative space, and the meta-language helps me with that. I'm also in a state, that has a strong belief that learning to become a teacher is developmental. So the California standards for the teaching profession are definitely a developmental approach. And I think the meta language that in this approach of working with candidates, supported by careful observations, some amount of data collection, and structured in-person conversation. When I say in-person, that doesn't rule out Skyping and Google Hangouts, right? Although there is magic, I think, in the in-person. Anyway, so Joe Harris's last chapter after the moves is about revising. And what's important about this revising is that the writers look at their own draft of their essay after some amount of work, and then they can take each of the moves before and apply them to the text of their own piece. So see how they do that? So I'm interested in taking, I'm skipping over the great quote there. I'm interested in taking the text of a just taught lesson. Right, so we think of our teaching as a draft. What I did today with my students, it's just a draft. It's in a stream of practice that I'm always honing. Okay? How do we do that? So when Harris, in his book Rewriting, he talks about applying moves, let me get a little pointer, right, to improve the writing the essay. We, as those who work with beginning teachers, can use some sort of moves in language in a structured way to help these beginning teachers improve their teaching and our own teaching. In his epilogue, I believe it is, Harris also has this term sponsor revision. This was a brand new phrase to me, and I love this because we're in a culture where we enjoy finished products. I mean, as much as people line up for the iPhones, and there's, iPhone 6, and we know there was, back when there was an iPhone 1, we know things change, but we don't see that hard work and all the iterations that went into getting something to its practice, skillful state. So whether that's a material good, or whether it's a professional athlete, or a dynamic professional professor who is so good at what he does. And I'm looking at Jonathan because that's right. 25 years of teaching methods, he is amazing to watch in action. And I'm at the beginning of my methods teaching, and boy, it's, as you know, it's a lot to learn. And so I'd just like you to turn to a person next to you and just say, what do you experience of value when you reflect on your just taught lesson? Just take a moment. I know the risk that I take when I ask English teachers to talk. Teachers in general, okay. In the last year, I want to see a show of hands. How many of us, including those of you who teach at the university level, how many of us have enjoyed, after an observation, I don't mean a 5-minute walkthrough, I mean after seeing you teach for a length of time, if not the entire lesson, a substantial chunk of time, a formal, structured, pretty much uninterrupted conversation in the last year. Show of hands, please. Okay, let's look around. Look, keep your hands up. I want those of you who don't have your hands up, let's look around. That's about, Jonathan, 1/5 of the room? Yeah. Yeah, 1/3. Oh, yeah, okay. Yeah. Yes? Okay. So I'd just like us to consider what this might imply about our profession. And we each might have a role to play in changing this so that every hand goes up next year. Okay. Of the moves, I want to spend my remaining time focusing on two. And the one is the coming to terms move. I think it's a radical move because of when you, as a mentor teacher, can ask it of a student teacher, beginning teacher. Right after they've taught, often you'll see two reactions. Students who go into self-judgment, whether they're giving themselves pats on the back or they're beating themselves up for something that went not so well, or they'll go right into the minutia of a specific moment. And there's nothing wrong with either one of those. And of course, there's other options as well. But we see that pattern in action. However, if you ask them, what's your project? What are your aims with these students? If you do that immediately after, it has this magical effect of pulling them out into a more reflective space. Or at least that's been my experience. And it also has this sense of reminding them of their larger purpose and giving a beginning teacher practice at articulating what that larger purpose or vision, what their project as a teacher is. And over time, if you're meeting with them regularly, you can see, the two of you, how that evolves. And you want that involvement to be for them, not for you. We can articulate our visions, our projects, our aims, on good days anyway, right? Let me go back to the other, and then the other effects of it. I don't have research to support this, but I think one of the effects of getting teachers to talk about their larger aims, their projects, is that they're more likely to persevere, and they might be more willing to do the hard change on the inside that they need to do to become a better teacher. Again, I don't have research to support this, it's just a hunch. You know all about countering. I'm not going to spend my remaining time talking about this. I want to get to the verbal sentence outline. But countering it's so challenging. It's very different from when you're countering in writing, because as Joe says, you want to pretty quickly sum up and then get to what other possibilities are there. Can you imagine if, as mentor teachers, oh, this is what you did, now here's what you should try next time. If you did that immediately, that makes your relationship, it could be kind of more rocky than you want to, a little more challenging than it needs to be. All right. So I want to get to the verbal sentence outline with you. What is it? Why do it? Tips for trying it. I started talking about so much of the expertise in our profession being invisible. This might be one way to bring visibility to move making. So a sentence outline in the teaching of writing and in revising is not an abstract, because an abstract is about summarizing content. It's a little different. It is condensed like an abstract, but in a verbal sentence outline, the student writer will look back at his almost finished essay and roughly per paragraph come up with a sentence that identifies what move was made. So here's where I contrast, here's where I build. And often in this process of trying to come up with a sentence per paragraph, they'll see maybe where their moves don't build on one another. So the gift, and that's an important thing to see, right, is where your piece is not building. Just as much you want to see where it is building on the moves are building one upon the other, whether it's an essay or whether it's a just taught lesson. So my gift to you today is a handout, and it's the verbal sentence outline, and I propose a reason to do it is to make visible that you can close a formal conversation with a student teacher by saying, we started off by talking about your larger aims for the students so that we both know what the big picture is here, and it helps you become invested in this important work we do. Then we talked about what works, because you do need to build on the strengths that you have, and you do have so many. We then talked about some other possibilities, that's the countering move, and you named several. No, you named, right? Not the mentor-teacher naming. And then we talked about what's next. And by saying out loud some possibilities for what is next, we think that you might be more likely to try them. And so the idea behind perhaps trying this is, again, making the moves visible so that the teachers you work with can become people who consciously are deciding to do things with students that have purpose and they can be strategic. Thank you.
Can everyone hear me? Anyone who can't hear me? Good. I'm Jonathan Lovell. I have two different and related roles. I'm the director of the San Jose Area Writing Project, now in its 27th year. And during those same 27 years, I've been at San Jose State, and I've been co-directing the English education program. My responsibilities divide between teaching methods class, as Terry had mentioned, which I was doing up until 3 semesters ago, and then also supervising student teachers, which I continue to do and will continue to do till the spring of 2018, when I will ride off into the sunset and wish you all the best. There are certain characteristics of our final semester student teaching that are somewhat unique to San Jose State, but hopefully broadly characteristic of student teaching programs or credential programs in the nation as a whole. Our student teachers in their final semester take responsibility for 2 different classes, generally around the 2nd or 3rd week of the semester, and they keep responsibility for those 2 classes right through till the end of the semester. Okay? They work with either 1 or 2 mentor teachers during that time. Again, depending on the configuration of the school, we try to get student teachers aligned with either 2 different grade levels or 2 different ability levels of students. And they use both their own and their mentor teachers' materials in order to teach. So they're hardly autonomous at this point. They're making use, as good beginning teachers should, of the knowledge and expertise of the mentor teachers. And we do have the benefit of, for quite a few of our mentor teachers, they're also writing project teacher consultants. So we've had a fairly long history with those teachers before they begin to serve as mentor teachers. My own responsibilities as a supervisee, again, are similar to, but a little different from the practice that's generally followed. I visit each student teacher about 7 to 10 times during the semester, depending on how much I feel they need that supervision and that observation and that response. I write what I call observational notes during those classes. That is, I'm handwriting pretty much a running continuous narrative about what I'm noticing is happening in the class. I debrief with my student teachers by reading over those notes aloud, face-to-face, one-on-one, and then we further debrief by discussing the lesson as a whole. This particular semester, I was also able to interview all my student teachers at the midpoint of their student teaching semester, and it was a particularly opportune time for me to do that from the student teacher's perspective, because they were all completing something called the California Performance Assessment. So the performance assessment for California teachers, a portfolio-based assessment, and the final task of that portfolio is reflecting on a week's worth of lessons that you just taught. So all of the student teachers you'll be seeing in just a moment are about a week and a half away from writing that final task of their pack. So I know I have them in a very good place as far as an impetus for reflecting on their teaching. If they do not pass the pack, they do not get a credential. So it's high stakes testing in spades. If you would like to see the interviews in their full length, of course I've just had very short excerpts from 3 of the interviews. It's very easy to locate the interviews in their entirety. If you go to YouTube, just Google YouTube, as it says, and search Jonathan Lovell. There are other Jonathan Lovells in the world, it turns out, and some of them have YouTube channels. But if you go down to the 7th option, a photo of me and my wife, Ellen, pretty easy to recognize, and you click on that photo, then all of the YouTube interviews will be right there for you to take a look at. Again, the observational note, just to remind you, this is the first student teacher we'll be looking at, teaching at the middle school level, and I began this, these were my first observational notes when I came out to observe her teaching her 7th grade class. So again, I write these as the first of 3 pages of narrative based on what I'm observing in the lesson. This student, Corey Morbo, is teaching in a low-performing 7th and 8th grade middle school, as you see. She's teaching first semester 7th graders. Much to the dismay of her mentor teacher, they're being asked to learn argumentative writing in the beginning of their 7th grade year. They're just not in middle school. And this is, of course, due to our friend David Coleman, and this prioritizing of argumentative or opinion writing, and her whole school has been asked to assume that same argument, opinion, and, argument informational and narrative writing, just like it's laid out in the Common Core. And it's a little important that the mentor teacher is not in favor of this particular type of curriculum, but she's doing the best she can to assist her student teacher. So the student teacher is using both her own and her mentor's teacher's text. This is very important to the little excerpt that we have. Now take a look at what the student teacher says.
Handout. And I even skipped over other parts that were on there.
Yes, I know. She treated that lightly.
Yeah, they had a little mathematical equation for it, and I didn't like that either.
Right.
I think that could be used maybe in a more advanced, like older class that is already familiar with this, and so that stuff kind of like they get it already, rather than this being the first time it's introduced, and then they're throwing out all these things, words at you, and then a plus sign and an equal sign is added in there, and it's like, what?
Rhetoricians tend to be somewhat fond of worthless metaphors. Yeah.
So that was my least favorite part of that handout.
Yes. So how did you deal with the somewhat specialized vocabulary when you taught today? Just because the people watching the video have the advantage that I have. I'm actually watching that.
So I would just explain it as I said it. So the first one is identification. So I said that's what we call, we're calling it identification. That's what is the topic? What are we talking about?
Right. Yeah.
And then for the claim, I said, what do you think about it?
Right.
What you believe, what you think, your opinion.
Right.
And then for the third one, direction, I said those are going to be your reasons for your opinion.
Yeah.
Do you think cell phones should be banned?
Right.
Tell me why.
One moment.
Just to clarify, what Corey has done is to take a handout that her mentor teacher has given her, and it introduces students to argumentative writing by calling what we would call topic ID, I, capital D. What we call a claim, calls a claim. What we would call supporting reasons for that claim, it calls direction. Who the hell knows why. But anyway, that was the handout that she had to deal with, and what she has just described to me is how she would change that language into language that her students would understand. So if I could ask you to turn to a partner and say, what did you notice about this, how the student teacher was coming to terms with their teaching practices? What did you notice about what she had to say?